Welcome back. This is Pastor Allen. We're continuing in our series now on modern day forms of idol worship or idolatry. And today's should probably be a little short but sweet, or rather should say short but very sour because it's a very unsavory topic. Today the subject, the idol worship of this broadcast is politics. And politics, as we know, is probably about as old a profession as prostitution and definitely shares many of the same traits as prostitution. It's basically the art of lying, the art of having people's favor for personal or political advantage, and involves all kinds of unsavory character traits such as bribery, duplicity, and we see it everywhere today, and it's very often a real convenient cover for people to hide behind when things get a little too heat, when they feel the heat of public opinion or pressure coming down too hard on, and they rely on this old standby, this old favorite idol, which you can always make as a shield for for protection against any kind of accusation or anything that you want to hide from people. And we see it all over the place, excuse me. Probably the most famous example you're going to find about the idol and the corruption of politics is in the future. It's going to be during the Tribulation Period, when the Antichrist is going to make a deal with the Jews for protection of Jerusalem and their city and the temple, and allow them to build a temple and everything. And of course, it's all going to be a lie, a pretext to allow them to be sitting ducks for the invasion of the kings of the east and the north, and the setup for Armageddon. That's going to be the most dramatic example of the corruption of politics. Now, what does Jesus say about politics? Well, not much, actually. He talks about when they ask him, who do we give tribute to? Do we give it to the government or do we give it to God? And he says, whose inscription is on this coin? Is it Caesar's or is it God's? And it says it's Caesar's, so you can give to Caesar or render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So he doesn't have a whole lot to say about it. Now, in the epistles, they do say that we should pray for our leaders and all who are in authority, and all authority comes from God. So even if it's temporary, even if it's a corrupt leader, we have to give deference and obedience to the authority, the powers that be, as we say, that are present in our world. And certainly that's what we've all had to do. It's considered by Paul in his epistles to be absolute. All authority is given of God. So whatever the political ramifications, and whether we like the person who's in power, we have to put up with them or pray for them, and that God will direct their actions and guide their policies. So politics, ironically, sometimes overlaps with truth. And we have to learn through our discernment and our ability to discern the spirits when that happens. Now, occasionally, of course, politicians, they're risen up by God to be great leaders, great statesmen, like Winston Churchill, for instance, or Theodore Roosevelt, or someone like that, someone who's brought in for the time. And you can talk about the current state we have right now. You can very well come to the same sort of conclusion. God put Donald Trump in place to do something, to shake things up, to make a change. And it definitely has prophetic significance, whether you like it or not. But we have so many examples in our current climate and down through the years of people who have done something simply for political expediency. And in our age, where honor and integrity are in such short supply, we see this all the time. Right now, we've got a case where the current Attorney General in this ridiculous investigation based on the election, which is all completely fabricated and violates so many statutes and codes. Those are just facts. We can't deny it. These are right down the line. The Justice Department has become completely corrupt and completely political for the sake of destroying somebody. And this is not a political decision. This is a moral decision. But we have a very tiny man, a little man with a spine of Linguini. All deference to that crazy man from talk radio, Michael Savage. I love you. He used the expression Linguini spine, this Linguini spine, and it's very suited to this man, this little pipsqueak of a man called Jeff Sessions, who was hiding behind the label of political to avoid stepping into the firing range and taking the heat that courageous people would have done if they were principled and godly. And so it's just a cover. It's an idol. It's something that he hides behind. And we see this kind of cowardice all over the place today. So, it's always on the right, always on the rhinos' side, the conservatives, the fiscal conservatives. That's another form of idol worship right there, fiscal conservatism. They hide behind this to cover themselves. These are people who, as Jesus would say, they love the solemn assembly. They love the praise of men in the seats at the assembly. They just love the praise of men. They want to be invited to the cocktail parties. They want, to be hobnobbing with celebrities. And, of course, flattery. Flattery is how the Antichrist will woo people. He will be a flatterer as well as a destroyer through promising false peace processes. So this is what we have to look forward to. He should be the model when we think of the idol of politics. So we have Jeff Sessions, and recently, just not that long ago, John McCain died. And interesting thing about his funeral was he was rather the speakers always talking about his patriotism, but I don't think the mention of God once came up in his ceremony, or maybe at the very end, talking about breaking the surly bounds of Earth, like Ronald Reagan did after the Challenger disaster. But for the most part, we talked about his service. It was all very good. He did some good things at one time. He was a principled conservative. He had Christian values. He was nobody, is saying that he shouldn't be honored, and his sacrifice and his suffering was not to be honored. But at the very end, the praise of men just crept in there, and he was, he was a sellout to God, but he was a great patriot, and that's a very broad distinction, which we're going to go into later at another time. So there we have it. We pray for our leaders, but we recognize cowardice is everywhere in our last days. And the old fallback, the old sort of default mechanism that people on the left and on the right use is politics. Now, the famous British man of letters from the 1700s, Samuel Johnson, said once that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. And that is what we're going to get into next time, because politics as a false idol mingles and is right up there as a twin almost to patriotism as a false idol. So that's Pastor Allen. I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. There's so many forms of idol worship in the modern world today. We're going to get into more later on. And until then, I look forward to seeing you in another broadcast very soon. Thank you, and God bless you all.